So hello everyone. Now the topic which is given to me is finish lines in FPD. Now the initial parts, the principles of tooth preparation, what are the parts of FPD, everything must have been covered by now. So I'll be just talking about the finish lines in fixed partial denture. So these are the headings we'll be covering. So first coming to finish lines, according to the GPT-9, the finish line is defined as it is a junction of prepared and unprepared tooth structure with the margin of the restorative material. The simple definition. So what do you understand when I say finish line? So there is a tooth, and when you start preparing, after the tooth preparation, so this is your finish line. This is your functional cusp bevel. So there are different types of finish lines which are used for various cases. So first is the margin placement, where the margin is placed. So it is going to be supragingival, equigingival, or subgingival. Then marginal adaptation, there has to be marginal integrity according to the finish line. So whatever finish line you have prepared, so your prosthesis, your crown or 300 FPD bridge is supposed to be at that level. It is supposed to match. And then configuration of the preparation of the finish line. So shape and bulk of the restorative material in the margin of the restoration, the marginal adaptation, and degree of setting of the restoration. Then there is structural durability, depending on the marginal geometry and shape and configuration of the finish lines. We'll see all these things in a bit of details. So if you have the apical extension of the preparation, which can necessitate additional tooth reduction. So suppose if you have a supra-erupted tooth, so obviously the crown structure is going to be of extra height. A shoulder margin, we'll see the different geometrical finish lines. So shoulder margin is less conservative than a chamfer finish line. Chamfer is used for middle crown processes, and the shoulder is used for PFM crown processes. Now, when you have a proper finish line, it avoids dissolution of the luting agent. It avoids inherent roughness. There has to be a smooth and even margin. So when you have to record a good finish line, there has to be a tissue displacement, which is soft tissue management when you do a impression making. So in simple example, you have to do a gingival retraction. So you do a gingival retraction with the retraction cord, then you do a impression. You either pour the cast in the die, you make a wax pattern. After the wax pattern is made, you go for casting. So there are different processes which can be made. So there is a cast metal or all ceramic, metal ceramic or all ceramic. So when you have a prosthesis, when you are fabricating a prosthesis for a crown, there has to be a gap. There has to be a bit of gap which is supposed to be left at the finish line. So when you do a metal prosthesis, the gap is supposed to be of 10 microns. If you can see this part, the vertical gap, that gap has to be 10 microns when it is a metal prosthesis. If you are going for a PFM crown processes or ceramic crown processes, it has to be near 50 microns. Now, according to the level of the margin where it is made, so there can be that can be a supragingival margin, equigingival, or subgingival. So Christensen had demonstrated that the visually accessible, that is supragingival margin, it can be better fitted than subgingival margins, but it is a bit of obsolete theory right now. So when you talk about supragingival margins, it is easier to prepare with accuracy without any trauma to the soft tissue, because anyways you are keeping a space from gingival margin for your finish line fabrication. It can be situated in the hard enamel. It is very easy to be finished. It is easy to clean or oral hygiene, for the oral hygiene. The impression made is easy, it is very easily made with less potential for soft tissue damage, and the ease of evaluation of restoration on follow-up records. because you can see the finish line supragingivally. It is very easy to take a follow-up of it. But the very common problem which was seen eventually was the secondary caries, which is to occur at the junction of the finish line, like your processes and natural tooth. Then we come to subgingival margins. So low provide subgingival margins, major cause. It is a major cause for the periodontal disease. Now, the deeper the restoration margin is in the sulcus, greater is the inflammatory response. They are best avoided unless and until it is very indicated. The subgingival margin is not that advocated. It is placed at least 2 mm above the alveolar crest so that the biological width of the gingiva is not encroached. Now it becomes very difficult when you try to go for a subgingival margin to gauge how much far away you are from an alveolar crest. So many of the cases it happens that you go and disturb your gingival periodontal area. So again, unless and until the subgingival margin is indicated, it is not very commonly done. Again, the Christensen had demonstrated that experienced restorative dentists can miss marginal defect as great as 120 microns when the margins are subgingival. More than half of the proximal margins of gold crowns had defects greater than 0.2 mm, and more than 40% of the proximal margins of ceramic crowns had defects that exceeded 0.3 mm. Now, this was regarding a subgingival margin. Now, what are the indications for subgingival margin? So, aesthetic demands in the cases of anteriors 3 to 3, maxillary or mandibular. Subgingival tooth fracture, erosion or abrasion. If your caries is extended subgingivally, you have to cover existing subgingival restorations to gain the needed crown length. So in some cases when the CLP is not possible, the crown lengthening procedure is not possible, in those cases you might have to go with the subgingival margins, because you must have gone through that after the tooth preparation at least 4 mm of the crown structure is needed to have that retention and retention resistance and all those properties for the prosthesis. To gain more favorable crown contour, you might need to go for subgingival margins. Proximal contact areas extend into the gingival crest. Now you know that during your tooth preparation, you have to break the contact. So if your contacts are extending into the gingival crest, you have to go subgingival. If there is any root sensitivity or modification of axial contour is needed, in these cases your subgingival margin, the finish line has to go to the subgingival margin. What are the disadvantages of these? So first is plaque retention, greater pathogenicity of the subgingival dental plaque. There is mechanical irritation, violation of the biologic width. There are strong chances of soft tissue injury. Again, if it is not properly recorded, the subgingival finish line, the fit of the processes may become inaccurate. Again, it may result in secondary caries. Roughness of the tooth restoration interface, improper crown contour, failure to maintain the emergence profile of the prosthesis. Now you come to equigingival margin. It is in the most cases, the equigingival margin is advocated. So Macram and Newcomb concluded that the least amount of inflammation is seen when the margins are placed at the gingival crest. Harrison attributed to this due to the presence of keratinized epithelium, unlike the epithelium in the deeper gingival sulcus, which may be case in the subgingival margins. So what are the indications for this? So when dentist is able to control the preparation, impression, adaptation, cementation, as well as sealing, the patient can keep it free from the plaque, and when there are aesthetic demands. So equigingival margin is something which can be used in the very easily used for the posterior cases. Anterior cases, it is still advisable to go for subgingival margins because of aesthetic reasons. So what are the advantages with equigingival margins? So it is very easy to do the impression, finish equigingival margins, because you are not going below the tissue. It is very easily approachable, accessible. So you can also expect to see very healthy gingiva, although maybe not as healthy as it would be if you were to stay above the tissue, but still equigingival is more preferred. What will be the disadvantages for the same? Aesthetics can become an issue, but if you go in even to the tissue, it is less likely that you will have an aesthetic result. If your patient has discolor teeth and you are using an opaque material, a highly aesthetic result is more difficult to achieve than if you stayed subgingival, because it is a bit difficult to match the shades. Retain more plaque than supragingival or subgingival margins, and therefore cause greater gingival inflammation it may cause. Guideline for the margin design. The shape of the diamond point burr or the burr determines the finish line configuration and the taper of the preparation. So again, ease of preparation, ease of identification, distinct boundary, sufficient strength, and conservation of the tooth structure are the few points which are supposed to be kept in the mind. So what are the different types of finish lines? So you must have gone through this at least once. So there is chamfer, heavy chamfer, shoulder, radius shoulder, shoulder with bevel, slanted or sloped shoulder, knife edge, that is feather edge, it is one and the same thing, and chisel edge. So most commonly used are the chamfer and the shoulder. So it is for chamfer is for metal processes, and shoulder is for PFM processes. We'll see those in depth. These are the different finish lines. So C, as you can see, this is your chamfer, and this is your shoulder. We'll see those in depth. So coming to the chamfer finish line, it is preferred gingival finish line for the veneer metal restoration. It can be again used for the veneer metal restoration, but metal restorations. So Boucher, according to the Boucher, a margin finish line either curved or formed by a plane at an obtuse angle. So you can see the obtuse angle, this obtuse angle, to the external surface of the prepared tooth. According to the GPT-9, it is a finish line designed for tooth preparation in which the gingival aspect meets the external axial surface at an obtuse angle. By Tillman, a concave extracoronal finish line that provides greater angulation than a knife edge and less width than a shoulder. Bell, according to Bell, a reduction of 1.5 mm rounded internal line angle and cavo surface angle of 135 degrees. So it is necessary that you remember main, which is Boucher, and GPT-9. In Prosto, you'll be required to remember all the GPT-9 definitions, and just make sure that whenever you write a definition, you mention that it is whether it is a GPT-9 definition or Boucher or anything else than that. So talking about the chamfer finish line. So the burr which is used is basically something it looks like this. So this is called a torpedo burr. What tooth preparation, what you get out of this is, suppose this is your crown, you're doing a tooth prep, this is your functional cusp bevel. If you zoom in on this, what you'll see is something like this, and this is your prosthesis part. So this becomes your chamfer finish line. This is for metal restorations. Now talking about the instrumentation, what all do you need for these? So as you can see, tapered diamond with a rounded tip. You can see the rounded tip. The margin formed is an exact image of the diamond burr with high quality true running handpiece. You have to have a good air rotor for that. It can be cut with the tip of a rounded diamond while axial reduction is being done with the side of that instrument. So you can see this is the side of the instrument. So this is what prepares your wall, and this, the tip of it, makes your finish line. It is less likely to produce a butt joint. Margin of the cast region that fits against it combines an actual edge with a nearby bulk of the material. When you talk about, I'll just go back to the previous slide. So when you talk about the preparation of for the chamfer, you have to make sure that you do not cross more than half of the width of the burr, like this, because when you do this, if you are doing it properly, half of the burr, you get that proper like this finish line. If you are going deep with your burr, what happens is you get that unsupported enamel. If you are keeping your burr here, you'll have this unsupported enamel, which is not supposed to be the case for the tooth preparation. Okay, so this was regarding your preparation. The diamond is held precisely in the intended path of the withdrawal of the restoration. So you're supposed to keep your air rotor, your burr, parallel to the long axis of the tooth. because your burrs which are there, the chamfer and shoulder, they do have a 3-degree taper. So 3-degree taper you create on one side, 3-degree taper you create on another wall. So in total, in the end, what you get is a 6-degree taper, which is advised. So you have to make sure that your burr is very parallel to the long axis of the tooth. Otherwise, if it is not, in this case, like if you can see here, in this case, what you will do is you will create a taper, excess taper. And if you do opposite to that, like this, what you'll end up with is an undercut. So just make sure that your burr is very parallel to the long axis of the tooth. So tilting it away from the tooth, it creates undercut. Angling it towards the tooth will lead to over reduction as well as loss of retention because of increased taper. So these are the microscopic photos of how it looks once your preparation is done. Now the chamfer should never be prepared wider than the half the tip of the diamond, as I was explaining. Otherwise, an unsupported lip of enamel is going to be the result, if you can see over here. So then you have to remove all unsupported enamel, and you might end up with over prepared tooth. Okay. For the indication, sorry. Okay. So indications, it is for cast metal crowns, metal only when you have a metal ceramic crown with the metal ceramic facing, the metal aspect will be prepared with the chamfer finish line and lingual margin of the metal ceramic crown restorations. Now the advantages with the with the chamfer finish line is it is very distinct, easily identifiable margins, providing adequate bulk for the material. Accurate die trimming for fabrication of the cast restoration is possible. It is very easy to control. It exhibits less stresses, and a uniform type of geometry gingerly is established with the chamfer preparation. Now coming to heavy or deep chamfer, it provides 90-degree cavo surface angle with a large radius rounded internal line angle, and the radius of curvature is, it equals the depth of the axial reduction. It is very same. It is just you can say it is very deep chamfer. It is the first part what we saw was the chamfer. If you go a bit deep, it is going to be deep chamfer. It is created with a round end tapered diamond, which in the hands of an unskilled operator can create an undesired fragile lip of enamel at the cavo surface angle, as we saw with the chamfer finish line. This friable unsupported enamel is very easily fractured during or after cementation of the restoration, and it provides better support for a ceramic crown, the heavy chamfer, for a ceramic crown than does a conventional chamfer, but it is not as good as shoulder. So that's why for the PFM, post-infused to metal crowns, the shoulder finish line is advocated. A bevel can be added to the dip chamfer for use with a metal restoration. Now coming to shoulder, it is second most prominently used finish line. So what is basically shoulder? It is one that makes a 90-degree angle with the vertical axis wall of the preparation. So you can see over here. I'll show you the diagram. Also defined by an external cavo surface angle of 90 degree with a butt joint of the restoration and tooth at the margin. So when we talk about, again we'll just go through. If this is your tooth preparation, what you will see at the prepared finish line is like something like this. This is your finish line. This is your shoulder finish line, and this is where your burr is going to be. This is your shoulder finish line. So What are the disadvantages? First, it is very difficult to prepare. There is stress analysis, micro leakage, pulpar responses are not favorable. Sharp 90-degree internal line angle, it concentrates stress. It might result in a coronal fracture. So previously what used to happen was there was a sharp line angle like here, but eventually the burrs which were manufactured, they had not exactly 90-degree sharp angle, they are bit curved off. So now this problem is to some extent it has been managed. Excess tooth destruction, because anyways for PFM you have to do a bit of excess tooth reduction as compared to the chamfer, as compared for the metal processes. For PFM, because there is a metal coping and then ceramic layering, you anyways have to do a bit of extra tooth preparation. It is bulky, unsuitable margin finish except when modified with the bevel. Thickened wax pattern increases casting shrinkage. So again, this you might have gone through during your dental material classes, that casting shrinkage. So more the wax, there will be more the material, more the shrinkage. The advantages is wide ledge provides resistance to occlusal forces and minimizes stresses that may lead to fracture of the porcelain. So because you have a very thick finish line, so your forces, the occlusal forces are basically being transferred to the finish line, that occlusal that finish line table. So there is distribution of the forces. There is increased structural rigidity, clear impression because you have a very wide, good enough wide finish line as compared to chamfer, because chamfer is very sloping one. So shoulder, it is very easy to visualize, very easy to record. It provides space for healthy restoration contours, maximum aesthetics and bulk of the restoration. It provides a good bulk of restoration. So again, now the indications for all ceramic restorations, PFM restorations, facial margins of the metal ceramic crowns. It is prepared using a flat end tapering diamonds. Now because of the camera I could not show, otherwise I had the burrs which are used for chamfer in the shoulder, but it is not properly seen because of the camera. So that's why I was showing you with the drawing of the burr. So these are the finish line. This is how it looks, the shoulder finish line. And this is if you do a bevel to the shoulder finish line. If you can see here, this is junction. So you can see this, sorry, you can see this is your shoulder finish line. And if you are giving a bevel, so there are various degrees of the bevel which can be given. Now again you can see that there is a bit of space which is kept between the prosthesis and your finish line, the space which is supposed to be kept from the luting agent. Now when we talk about bevel, when the bevel is given to a finish line, it is not bevels during a tooth preparation. These are bevels for a finish line. Now the bevel is defined as a process of slanting the finish line and a curve of a tooth preparation. Now in 1963, the Rosner, the concept of reducing the marginal opening by use of a bevel finish line. Then by Gilbert Thayer, allowed the incorporation of a physiological contour in both the temporary as well as final crowns. So basically the objective is it allows the cast metal margin to be bent or burnished against the prepared surface. So the marginal integrity, when you talk about marginal integrity, it minimizes the marginal discrepancy of a crown that fails to seat completely. Because of the bevel, that error, that problem is to some extent managed. It again also removes the unsupported enamel, so it protects it from chipping. So what are the indications for this? So when you have extremely short walls, there is no tooth structure which is left after the tooth preparation. Facial margins of the maxillary partial coverage restorations. In those cases, you have to go for a bevel. Gingival finish line on the proximal box of inlay or onlay margins. If you are going for an inlay or onlay, you have to do the bevel to the finish lines. The shoulder is already present because of the dissection by caries or presence of previous restorations. Then in those cases you'll have to go with the bevel. If there is already processes, there was already on processes or caries or restorative material. In those cases you'll have to have modify the preparation and you'll have to give a bevel to it. Indicated for porcelain fused to metal preparations, you can give a bevel to the finish line. Now talking about, these are few times it has been used, but it is there. So radial shoulder, it is a shoulder finish line with a rounded internal line angle, indicated for all ceramic crowns, facial margins of the metal ceramic crowns. So if you can see, it is a shoulder like this, but the margin, the internal margin, it has been rounded off. Sorry. So this has been rounded off. If you can see this here as well as here, it has been rounded off. So it is done by flattened tapered diamond. A small radius rounded internal angle is instrumented with an end cut in parallel sided carbide finish bar. Or you just have to make sure that cavo surface angle 90-degree shoulder width is slightly less because of the rounded internal angle. So you can, these are the bars which can be used. So flattened taper, end cutting carbide finishing bar, and modified bind angle chisel. So again, because of the rounding of the internal line angle, there is stress concentration is very less in the two structure than with the classical shoulder, and support with the ceramic wall is good. Because of the rounded shape, the stress distribution is well managed. It is less conservative of tooth structure. Now we come to slanted shoulder or a sloping shoulder. Again, there is a classic shoulder, 90-degree angle. Then there is curved, the last one which we saw. Now this is sloping. So you can see this is a sloping shoulder. So 120-degree sloped shoulder margin alternative to 90-degree shoulder. It forms a facial margin of a metal ceramic crown. It reduces the possibility of leaving unsupported enamel and yet leaves sufficient bulk to allow thinning of the metal framework to a knife edge for acceptable aesthetics, but less conservative of tooth structure. Again, not so commonly used. Now there is a knife edge finish line, very small, very thinly prepared. If you can see over here, this is knife edge. Zero cutting results at the gingival termination. Very minimal preparation. So knife edge is on a lingual of a mandibular 3/4 crown. Okay, 3/4 crown. So there are different. If you see the classification according to the coverage, so there are complete coverage, then 3/4, then partial. Under the partial there is 3/4 or 7/8. So for those, this is used. So you have a proper finish line or the matching finish line. The dentist employs the rotary instrument and leans cutting stone or burr inward by rotating on the gingival termination and cutting mostly at the occlusal end. It is a process of dipping the rotary instrument occlusally, formed when all the convexities correlated to the margin of the tooth are removed. Again, very few cases it has been used. So disadvantages are thin margin, difficult to wax, cast. It is very difficult to mark the finish line. Over contouring of the restoration might happen. There is very lack of strength. Casting is subjected to distortion when subjected to occlusal loading. Difficult to locate on a die, does not provide sufficient bulk, and axial reduction may fade out. Advantages is ultimate acute margin for the metal, conservation of tooth structure very conservative, ease of preparation, and historically facilitated the making of impression with the rigid modeling compound in copper band, as no ledge was formed in which the band could catch. So indications: teeth with very convex axial surface toward which teeth have tilted. With root amputation is done, when the root amputation is done due to periodontal conditions in younger patients in accessible areas. A pin-ledged preparation for excess retention when you need retention. Outline for the partial veneer crowns, and contraindicated in ceramo-metal margins, as hypercontours will always form the attempt to place two restorative materials in the space left by the removal of the small amount of the tooth structure. Now, just to remember, all metal restoration, the metal processes recommended is chamfer finish line, and the reduction is to the depth of 0.3 to 0.5 millimeters. When you come for a metal ceramic, the porcelain fused to metal recommended thickness between 1 to 1.5 mm for porcelain veneer marginal area of the metal ceramic crown. The mean finish line width and the depth for the shoulder is 0.9 mm with a range of 0.5 to 1.8 mm. This is for PFM processes. When you talk about all ceramic processes, finish line depth of all ceramic crowns have ranged from 0.5 to 1 mm. So to finish up, when preparing teeth for aesthetic crown restorations, a clinician must determine which cervical line is appropriate for each specific clinical situation. It is not every case you can go hard and fast that this is the finish line which is supposed to be used. So it goes case to case. So you have to judge, you have to decide for yourself which finish line design, like chamfer, shoulder with bevel, and where supragingival, equigingival, or subgingival is subjective basis. All cervical margins must be placed in the correct position related to the free gingival margin, epithelial attachment, and the alveolar housing for a successful restoration. The placement of the finish line has a direct bearing on the ease of fabrication of a restoration and on the ultimate success of the restoration. Best results can be expected from the margin that are as smooth as possible and are fully exposed to cleansing action. So that's why equigingival and supragingival are better, because they are very easy to cleanse. The proper diagnosis and treatment planning, skill and execution of tooth preparation with correct finish line contour help to attain basic principles of tooth preparation like marginal integration and preservation of periodontium. You have to have that skill so that you do a good tooth preparation, and then your marginal fit or adaptation of your processes becomes good. So if you want to go in depth for any of the concept, so these are the different articles and the books which were referred to. There is a textbook, Rosenstiel, Schillenberg, good textbooks. So then there are some articles which I have gone through. So these are the articles you can go through. You can search on the Google or PubMed. You can very easily find articles for the same. Thank you. If you want to contact, or if you have any doubt, you can contact me for the same. Thank you so much.